Well, it's 9 o'clock, so we will begin today's virtual hearing on the legislative and policy framework for the 3 wind farms at Craiginmoddie, Carrick and Knockcronal in South Ayrshire. And it is, just to remind everybody, it's Monday the 19th of June. It's been quite a long programme, so I hope you're all feeling well this morning. Thank you all for agreeing to start at a slightly earlier time of 9 o'clock. I'm aware that a few people perhaps are still trying to join the meeting, but I am aware that all the main parties are here. So I think unless anybody objects, we will proceed. As most of you know already, my name is Rosie Levin and I'm one of the 3 reporters appointed by Scottish ministers to consider the 3 applications. And the other 2 reporters, Mr Bray and Mr Reid, are with us on the call today and may participate at various points during the agenda. I'll be chairing today's session based on the agenda that was issued on the 18th of May, and I hope that you've all received that okay. I confirm that the revised agenda that was sent out simply amended the date. There was no changes to any of the items listed. As normal, the session is being broadcast live, and as with the previous sessions, in taking part today, you're consenting to being filmed and to the use and storage of those images and sound recordings and any information contained in them for webcasting and training purposes, and for the purpose of keeping historical records and making those records available to the public. So I'll turn now to all the parties to please introduce themselves. If I could perhaps start with the 3 applicants, and then I'll move on to the Council and Save Straighton and Galloway and Southern Ayrshire Biosphere, and we'll see if anybody else is on after that. So if we could perhaps start with Craiginmoddie.
Yes, good morning, Mum. As you know, my name is David Hardy. I'm a partner with CMS and I'm in charge of the Craiginmoddie team. I've got with me Christopher Calvert, who is an executive director with Pegasus and has been the producer of the planning policy related documents. I also have Mr. Michael Briggs from the client, who may well contribute as well. So there are 3 of us.
Okay, that's helpful. Thank you. Mr. MacLeod.
Good morning, Mum. Ewan MacLeod. I'm a solicitor with Shepherd and Wedderburn. I've got 2 witnesses today, Mr. Jamie Scott from WSP and Ms. Mary Fisher from Absaline Landscape Planning.
Thank you very much. And Mr. Fraser?
Good morning, ma'am. My name is Vincent Fraser, King's Counsel. I'm instructed by Pinsent Masons, and my instructing solicitor, Mr. Gary McGibbon, is on the call also. And my witness today, ma'am, is Mr. David Bell, whose hearing statement, I think.
Thank you very much. And if we could turn to South Ayrshire Council now, please, Mr. Armstrong.
Good morning, Mum. My name is Douglas Armstrong. I'm King's Counsel at the Scottish Bar. There are 3 witnesses for South Ayrshire Council today: Steve Callum and Nick Lopez, planners from Stantec, and Carol Anderson, landscape architect. The details of their qualifications and experience are set out in the Council's hearing statement 15.23 at paragraphs 1.12 to 1.14.
Okay, thank you very much. If we could turn to Save Straighton for Scotland, is it Mr. Shaw that's representing you? If you could unmute yourself, Mr. Shaw, please.
It's me, Christopher Shaw. I'm on my own.
Okay, thank you very much for joining us. And Galloway and Southern Ayrshire Biosphere.
Good morning. I'm John Thompson. I'm the Vice Chair of the Galloway and Southern Ayrshire Partnership Board, and I too am on my own.
Okay, thank you. Are there any others who intend to participate that are on the call today? I'm not seeing any hands go up. Okay, that's very helpful. Thank you. So the purpose of today is to probe further around the matters raised in your hearing statements, and we're not going to go over ground that's already agreed or where we don't consider that we need further information in order to prepare our reports. So today's session is a structured discussion. I'm going to lead based on the agenda. I'm not going to allow any formal presentation of cases or cross-examination, and I will lead the discussion on each agenda item by directing a question at one of the parties or one of the teams. And after that answer, I will allow others to comment, and this may generate a bit of discussion or other questions. Obviously, there are quite a few of us on the call today. I may not go round each party individually when we come to that sort of discussion or wider comments, so I will be relying on you to put up your hand and let me know that you want to speak, but I will give an opportunity for that to take place. If you have any comments or questions as we go along, as I say, make sure they come through me and put your hand up to let me know that you want to speak. Please let other parties finish their point when they're talking, and even if you don't agree with what they're saying. I'll leave it up to each team leader to decide who answers the questions. Please have any documents to hand electronically. I hope that you all have access to those this morning, and please use the CD number and the electronic page or paragraph number if you're making references, and we can pause if necessary to make sure that everybody has access to the documents, including ourselves. And thank you to the applicants and the council for the statement of agreed matters, which shows agreement on a number of matters in relation to the legislation and the policy framework. That said, there is a fair amount to cover on the agenda, and we don't expect to have a lot of spare time today, but we'll keep moving through the items, and I'll move on when we consider that we've got what we need. Please don't feel obliged to comment if you're only agreeing with what somebody else has said or repeating what's already in your written submissions. All that you tell us today is evidence that may need to be included in our reports, and so you'll see us take notes as we go along, and again we may pause from time to time to make sure that we have what we need. So we do aim to try and deal with all the matters on the agenda during the course of today. We have until around 5 o'clock, and we will take various breaks at appropriate points during the day, perhaps a little more than normal because it is quite a long session and we're all punctual. And we will plan to take an hour for lunch as normal around about 1 o'clock. So before we turn to the main first item on the agenda, does anyone have any procedural questions? No, everyone looks happy enough. So we'll turn to item 2 on the agenda, which is the legislation. And following the submission of the hearing statements, we don't really consider that there's any need for detailed discussion on the legislation, other than to confirm that of the 3 applicants, Carrick is the only electricity generation licence holder to which the responsibilities under paragraph 3 of Schedule 9 of the 1989 Act will also apply. Is that correct? Yes, everyone's nodding. That's helpful. Are there any other legislative matters that are not already covered in the hearing statements that anyone wants to raise before we move on to item 3? No.
Just one point from me, ma'am, and it was mentioned a couple of weeks ago during the SEPA Peak hearing, and it's the Climate Change Scotland Act 2009, which is CD 4.3. And I just really wanted to re-emphasise the fact that section 44, which you'll find on page 37 of the PDF, requires Scottish ministers, when exercising their functions, and that obviously includes considering whether to grant any of the section 36 applications before you, it requires them in exercising those functions to do so in the way best calculated to contribute to the delivery of the emission targets in part 1 of the Act. And I think for the purposes of today, it's important to set that out, and because it does provide the context for consideration of a number of policies in MPF 4 and other documents.
Okay, thank you, Mr. MacLeod. Does anyone else want to comment on that? No. Okay, thank you. If we could move on to item 3 then. So that's the onshore wind policy statement, which is CD 516, if people want to get that out in front of them. And item 3A is about the accuracy of the capacity projections. So obviously the main parties agree from what we see in the hearing statements that climate change, energy and the related targets should all be afforded weight in the planning balance. But we do want to just probe a little bit more about these projected capacity figures on page 5 of the OWPS and some of the wider changes in the energy sector. So firstly, feeding into that, what would be the likely implementation date for each of the 3 applications if they were consented? And to what extent would the projects help to meet the 2030 target? So I'm just going to go in order of the applicants. So I think if I'll start with Craiginmoddie.
Yes, so
Right.
Mr. Calvert's going to take the lead on answering these questions. So I think if you direct them to him in the first instance, and if there's anything different, he'll tell you.
Thank you, Mr. Calvert.
Thank you. The energisation date for Craiginmoddie is intended to be 2029, although there are discussions, ma'am, with Grid to refresh that position, which could bring that forward to 2027.
Okay. And Carrick?
Thanks, ma'am. Yeah, commencement of development is indicated currently in Q4 of 2025 with the grid connection date of Q3 2027.
Okay, and Knockcronal?
Good morning, yes. The
Morning.
grid connection date for Knockcronal is in March 2027. So that's a contracted grid connection date in that month. Therefore, if construction was to start in, let's say, early 2025, then the development could be energised by March 2027 and would definitely, in that context, contribute to the 2030 target.
And I will allow others to comment on this item just shortly, but I think if we go back round to ask my second question, which was the extent to which the installed and projected capacity figures in that table on page 5 are considered to be up to date and accurate. And I'll just highlight a couple of issues here. Mr. Bell, I think, highlights in table 2.3 of his hearing statement, so that's CD 15.22. Mr. Bell highlights that a considerable proportion of operational capacity will have passed its notional design life by 2030. So I'm quite keen to understand, in addition to sort of a general view about whether those figures are accurate, whether Mr. Bell can give any more insights into the proportion that might decommission and the proportion that might repower in that sort of timescale. So I think we'll go through the applicants again at the moment to just try and answer that question about table 5. So, Mr. Calvert.
Okay, so I've not got quite the detail perhaps that Mr. Bell has set out within his, but obviously just highlighting what is said within the onshore wind policy statement about the vulnerability perhaps of the figures that are in there in terms of duplication. Also that not all schemes will get consent as part of that pipeline. Craiginmoddie is part of that pipeline itself. There is an update to the onshore wind policy statement, table 5, set out within the draft energy strategy and just transition plan, which is CD 005.030 as well. Gives a modest update, but just shows the narrow error of margin effectively of meeting that 20 gigawatt target by 2030.
Okay, thank you. All right.
Thanks, ma'am. Yes, I think in terms of the table, recognise that core document 5059 was entered into evidence by South Ayrshire Council, which is are the most recent figures. So it does update those figures by my estimation. I think it takes us to a 0.2 gigawatt increase in operational capacity to 9 gigawatts at this point in time. And in the planning pipeline, 11.7 gigawatts. So I think we can see that modest progress has been made towards the 2030 target of 20 gig of installed onshore wind.
Thank you. And Mr. Bell?
Thank you. I think I would start by saying that the figures in the onshore wind statement are a snapshot in time. That's all they can ever be. And the new figures provided by the council in CD 05.018, as the Carrick Carrick applicant has just said, it's a very marginal, non-material difference in the figures, we would say. The other point to note is that the figures are a minimum to be attained by 2030. And in terms of the figures around the volume of development that would come offline effectively by 2030, I don't have that data, but what I think is instructive is that there are very few repowering applications coming forward at the moment in Scotland. There's one or two, but very limited evidence of a large volume of repowering coming forward. And I think, as Mr. Calvert highlighted, the footnote is very important on page 6 of the onshore statement, where it does highlight that there will be a degree of duplication. So there will be some schemes that are currently operational, but they may be, or consented, I should say, but they are currently being submitted for a tip height increase at the same time. And of course, the Knockcronal scheme is one of those projects within the pipeline. So I think the main message is there still is a very substantial shortfall against what is a minimum target. Thank you.
Thank you. I might just bring in Mr. Shaw here, because Mr. Shaw had suggested in his hearing statement, paragraphs 3.7 and 3.8 of his hearing statement, which is CD 1720. Mr. Shaw was suggesting that repowering would provide more significant levels of capacity than are set out in OWPS, therefore that no new sites were required. And he was also going on to talk about the development of other technologies and how that would reduce the need for more onshore wind. So I wonder if the applicants could respond to that before I then ask Mr. Shaw and the council to comment. Mr. Bell, would you like to come back on that, because you specifically talked about the repowering levels there?
Yes, I think certainly in my experience, a number of developers are finding that the technology remains very valid to operate beyond 25 years. Generally, wind farms have been well maintained and can continue operating, because repowering is not necessarily straightforward, because it involves larger turbines, potentially in an expanded site, and there are various constraints that will apply. That's why I think it's quite a slow progress in terms of repowering coming forward, and life extensions are perhaps the easier and more effective option. Now, even if repowering was to accelerate, and we would see more of it, the government is very clear in its documents that given the volume of capacity expected by 2030 to be operational by then, that it's imperative that new sites come forward. And that's why we see in NPF 4 policy 11 that we'll come on to, that the policy is supportive of new wind farms.
Okay. Any of the other applicants want to comment on that before I open it to the others? Mr. Gilbert, sorry.
Thank you. Just to echo slightly Mr. Bell's point, but to expand upon it, my experience with repowering has been largely in the life extension. So we've been going through a process as a consultancy of that extension. So we've got a durability of the machines themselves and proven technology to deliver the renewable energy benefits. As a result, repowering in the sense of taking down and putting up new turbines is fraught with the difficulties that Mr. Bell has said, not insurmountable, but the life extension is certainly part of that.
Okay, okay. Would Mr. Shaw like to comment first, given that I've raised questions in relation to your hearing statement?
Yes, ma'am. First, 2 or 3 very quick points. Firstly, the table that we're talking about was actually based upon analysis by Renewables UK, which, as I said in my submission, what is in fact a lobby group or a trade association of the wind industry. So you do have to consider it in that light. regardless of what is projected about repowering of existing wind power stations, the previous onshore wind policy statement did promulgate a figure of approximately 4 times the existing capacity when these were repowered, when these existing power stations were repowered. The fact that we haven't, Mr. Bell says we haven't seen too many coming forward at this stage is merely a function of time, as far as I can see. The biggest problem, and I'll come on to this in later aspects, is the connection to the grid. Now, all of these applications claim that they've been given dates or connections to the grid, but actually, as I'll discuss further when we get on to the next section, that doesn't actually mean very much, because if the grid can't take the electricity that they're producing, then the fact that they've got a connection is really not terribly relevant.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Shaw. Mr. Armstrong, would the council like to comment?
Yes, ma'am. It'll be Mr. Callan that will deal with this and have say a few words about repowering and what's set out in the onshore wind policy statement on that at section 5.3. Perhaps just to pick up on one minor point that Mr. Bell referred to the latest energy statistics as being in CD 518. It's CD 559.59, which has the fourth quarter figures. And I understand that the latest figures are about to come out some stage, either at the end of this month or the beginning of next month. And with that introduction, I'll go over to Mr. Callan.
Thank you.
Morning, ma'am. I just want to clarify that on the council perspective, there is a rule for repowering and has a lane meeting the targets within the onshore wind policy statement. 5.37 19 wind farm developments being repowered and increase the generation 100%, only using the number of lines. It's obviously very early days in repowering and something that would say in terms of the energy mix going forward. One of the benefits of repowering is and easier site forward on them it's already.
Okay, thank you. Any other comments on this agenda? No, I don't see any thumbs up. Then we'll move on to item B, which is raised really in Mr. Shaw's hearing statement again, which is CD 1720. And he raises the issue of wind farm constraint payments. So if you look at paragraph 3.17 of that hearing statement, are there any views on the apparent significant increase in wind farm constraint payments? The OWPS does highlight rapidly increasing constraint payments. I think that's in paragraph 8.2.2 of the OWPS, but it doesn't seem to go as far as to say they must or will be reduced. So how should we consider that matter of constraint payments in our reports relating to individual proposals? Could I ask the applicants first to respond? Mr. Calvert.
Thank you. My opinion is it's not a land use planning issue. It's a common feature, but it's not something that the applicant at Craiginmoddie is going to participate in the capacity market. So it's not such a relevant point for ourselves.
Does anybody have any additional comments on that? Mr. Scott?
Thanks, man. Yeah, just echoing largely what Mr. Calvert said there. It's largely not a planning matter. It's obviously a matter covered within energy policy, hence it's in the onshore wind policy statement. I think it's recognised that there are certain areas of constraint in the transmission network, but it's largely for the ESOs, the transmission network operators, who are investing and addressing those issues.
Okay. Mr. Shaw, I see you've got your hand up.
Yeah, I mean, clearly it's not directly a planning matter, but I commented in my submission about the massive increase in constrained payments. The latest research by the Renewable Energy Foundation reports that for January and February of 2023, £69 million was paid out in constraint payments. That's £1 million a day. The Daily Telegraph on the 15th of June, and of course you can't believe what you read in the newspaper, projects that unless things change, that figure will grow to 3.5 billion by 2030. I fully accept it's not a planning matter for constraint payments of themselves. However, it is indicative of the fact that the grid is actually the problem and not the requirement for additional capacity.
Thank you, and I hope you can let that dog out if that's your dog, Mr. Shaw. Anybody else? Mr. Bell, did you want to say anything? Sorry, I realised I passed by. Mr. Bell? Sorry, I can't hear you, Mr. Bell. Mr. Bell, I think you're still on mute.
My apologies. Yes, I've just said the matter is not a planning matter. It's not even indirectly a planning matter. And I would say the matter of constraint payment should not bear any weight on the matter of whether consent should be granted or not. And that's why I've not engaged on the matter at all in my evidence, because I don't think it's relevant to the decision maker. I think an important point is the Scottish Government, as we can see in the onshore wind statement, is very well aware of constraint payments. But that hasn't stopped the government setting a target for onshore wind for 20 gigawatts by 2030. We know at NPF4 Policy 11 that there is a statement that grid capacity should not constrain renewable energy development. And that's not a new policy guide. That was within SPP at paragraph 165. Where it said that grid matters were not a relevant consideration. Thank you.
Thank you. Anybody else want to comment? No. Okay, thank you. Item C is about paragraph 3.6.2 of the OWPS. So if we could look at the interpretation of that paragraph. So stronger weight is being given to the contribution to the climate emergency as well as community benefits. So we wanted to just probe a little bit more about what do parties take to mean by community benefits. And I want to focus here just on what the parties think community benefits mean generally. I think you will have an opportunity later in the agenda to expand on this in relation to each of your proposals, but it was more just a sort of interpretation of what you take to mean, what you take community benefits to mean. So I'm conscious I keep going to Mr. Calvert first. Maybe I should go to Mr. Bell first this time and just swap it around. So, Mr. Bell? Okay,
thank you. I think firstly, the term rate or weight is important to note because that is a change. It's signifying a change. It has to be something extra than went before in the SPP context. I think where we can see that come through in section 3.6.
Well, you're breaking up a little bit there. We'll just pause till we hopefully get you back. You've frozen on my screen anyway. Right, could you try again now?
Sorry, was that me? Did I freeze? Sorry.
Yeah, you're still, I think you're okay now.
Sorry, did you hear any of what I said or do you want me to start again?
Very much. No, if you could just start again, it's probably best.
Okay, sorry, I'll try to keep it brief. In terms of stronger weight, I was saying that must mean something extra than went before in the SPP context. So there's clearly more weight being given to the contribution of a development, and we see that at section 3.6.2. So that is the primary reference to stronger weight, and then it goes on to say as well as community benefits. I take the view that community benefits, if it's a financial benefit, is not a material consideration for the application. But in terms of stronger weight to the contribution of the development, that will be in terms of its energy generation benefits, the carbon savings, and some of the other aspects such as socioeconomic benefits, some of which, of course, will benefit local communities. Thank you.
Okay. Other applicants? Does Mr. Scott or Mr. Calvert? Mr. Scott, yeah.
Thanks, ma'am. Yes, in terms of community needs benefits, the Carrick applicant has defined that within their submission, within their EIA report, and also the planning statement. That's CD 2185 for the planning statement. So it's covered in respect of community benefits and shared ownership. So looking at the two things together in terms of how the community might be involved in terms of having a stake in the project, and then an ongoing legacy in terms of community benefits, in terms of investment in local facilities or infrastructure as the community see fit. I do know what Mr. Bell says in terms of that perhaps not being a material consideration, which I do accept. But I do think in terms of the onshore wind policy statement and NPF4 position about a just transition, it's important to note that the Carrick applicant has sought to make arrangements in place for access to an ongoing legacy from the wind farm.
Thank you. Mr. Calvert?
If I may just come in a little bit, Mr. Calvert can say something as well if he wants to, but your question initially, Mark, was in relation to community benefits. Of course, there is a comma which comes before that, so that the community benefits is as well as the stronger weight to be afforded to the contribution of the development of the climate emergency. So I think it's important to stress that in policy terms you've got greater weight. And I think that was the point really that Mr. Bell was directing his answer to. It's that first clause and then comma as well as community benefit. So just to make that point, it's not just stronger weight to community benefit.
And what do you take to mean by community benefits?
I've got nothing. I'm happy with the answer that's just been being given.
Okay.
Mr. Calvert, I don't know whether you want to add anything.
Not particularly, no. I think the comments made by Mr. Bell and Mr. Scott, in fairness, are correct. Only right for me just to identify that the Craiginmoddie scheme has also set out in some detail the elements of community benefits themselves, but that element of stronger weight and that shifting, that definition of significant, that imperative is very, very clear through NPF4. It's part of that cohesive nature of NPF4 and the onshore wind policy statement as well. So just that addressing the balance.
Mr. Callan, or would the council like to comment?
It will be Mr. Callum that will deal with this question.
Yeah. Paragraph 3.62, we need to be seen in context. The 3.6.1 says means ensuring the right development is in place. There are other community benefits, including biodiversity enhancement, which I'll get on to later in PF4, recreational, proposals, and so it's not solely related to more socioeconomic aspects of it in terms of community benefit payment and shared ownership.
That's helpful. Anyone else want to comment? Mr. Bell? Are you on mute again, Mr. Bell?
Sorry, there'll be a penalty next time, I'm sure. The last thing I wanted to say, and it's perhaps the most important part of this whole section of the OWPS, and nobody's mentioned it, in the paragraph Mr. Callender's referred to, it says in underlined text, this will change the landscape. So the target by 2030 will require taller and more efficient turbines. This will change the landscape. So the government clearly signalling their landscape change that will be carried through in terms of the policies in NPF4. So I think we shouldn't lose sight of that as part of the context as we move into looking at the NPF4 policies. Thank you.
Okay, Mr. Calvert?
Well, if I can just
Sorry,
jump in, I
Mr.
think it absolutely right. It ties to the point that I was making. This, of course, is in the section headed Landscape and Visual Amenity and MPF4. It's about the balance to be struck and how impacts on the landscape are to be taken into account. Mr. Bell's point that is going to change the landscape. And with respect, I absolutely agree with the council. You do have to read it 3.6.2 in the context of the preceding paragraph, and that is to do with change. So my point was, the key thing that I take from this is there is a drive for meeting targets and installed capacity, and as a result of that, stronger weight has to be given to the contribution of the development of the climate energy, as well as community benefits. That shouldn't be forgotten, but it's that extra weight which will sound in a changed equation when it comes to consenting of schemes, looking at the landscape effects that are going to result. So I think we started this discussion about the focus on community benefits. Actually, I think this section is yes, it does include that, but the fundamental point is about the change to the consenting equation brought about by greater weight to be afforded to the need to meet targets.
Okay. Mr. Calvert, did you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, just a note I'd made just in terms of Mr. Shaw's comment on the last section about a function of time. I just made a note of that simply because of that. We're in a decade of change in terms of what the onshore wind policy statement is saying, that imperative to drive towards accepting that change in the landscape, for example, towards meeting those targets in an underlying current of persistent failure to meet targets before that. So that incline, that range of mountains, not just one hill to climb, not one mountain to climb, is persistent. So that emphasis on weight towards significant benefit to combating climate change and greenhouse gas emissions is very, very telling. And that's that DNA point of how that flows from onshore wind policy statement through to MPF4.
Okay, Mr. Armstrong, you put your hand up.
Yes, ma'am. I'm sure we'll come on and discuss this in greater detail as we get into MPF4. But obviously, we've got the recent decision of the Scottish ministers in the Acne case, which was dated the 22nd of May 2023, and is core document 8.25A. And at page 16 of that, there are various statements in relation to the assessment of the Scottish Energy Strategy and Onshore Wind Statement, which concludes that the OWPS sets out the Scottish Government's position for the ongoing need for more onshore wind development and capacity in locations across Scotland where it can be accommodated in appropriate locations. So that's the up-to-date Scottish Minister's assessment of these matters. And we'll obviously, I'm sure, come back to that, and Mr. Callum will come back to that when we come on to consider the MPF, because there's obviously helpful guidance here from the interpretation that the Scottish Ministers are placing on their policy.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Shaw, I think you've got your hand up too.
Yes, ma'am. I'm a simple soul. I'm an engineer, and what I can't get my head around, quite simply, is how these developments can make a significant contribution to the reduction of emissions when we don't actually have significant emissions in Scotland at this point in time, except when the wind doesn't blow. I checked on Friday, and in the last 28 days, onshore wind contributed approximately 6% to UK electricity generation. That's from the figures from Durham University. Now, the reason for that was quite simple. The wind wasn't blowing very much during the last month. So we have a situation where when the wind doesn't blow, quite logically, there's no generation. And when it does blow, the grid can't accommodate it. Building more wind farms, quite simply, by straightforward logic, doesn't fix that problem. That's my first point. My second point is that other than financial inducement, which generally works out to be less than 1% of the profits which these people generate from these wind farms, it's very difficult to see general benefit to the community. There are 685 households in the area of Strayton, Daly, Cross Hills, perhaps 2,000 people. What overall benefit are they actually going to enjoy from these developments? There's a significant number of houses within 10 kilometers of these sites which don't even have a connection to mains electricity. So we're kind of in the realms of let's pretend. Let's pretend wind farms benefit rural communities. But even if they don't, what's it matter? A few dozen country bumpkins have their lives turned upside down, even maybe have to leave their houses. Most of them are brain dead anyway, otherwise they'd be bright enough to go and live in the city. The collateral damage when we're saving the planet, it doesn't matter, does it?
Thank you, Mr. Shaw. I might ask Mr. Thompson to come in here and make his points, and then I'll maybe go around the parties again to respond to some of the things Mr. Shaw said. Mr. Thompson, you've got your hand up.
Thank you. I realise that we're going to probably be coming back to these landscape issues in relation to NPF4, but since they've been highlighted now, nobody can quarrel with the statement that wind farms change the landscape. Obviously, wind farms change the landscape. That is why, in large part, they've been so controversial. But the bigger they get, the more they're likely to change the landscape, which I think is precisely what 361 is probably intended to say, which makes it all the more important that they're in the right place. And I tie that with what Mr. Armstrong was saying about what does appear in NPF4 about the right location for wind farms. And just going back, if I might, briefly to the point about repowering, I've been observing the whole process of wind farm development over many years now. And although I don't have the expertise that some of you around the table do, I recognise that actually the best sites, by and large, from a landscape point of view, were the ones that were developed reasonably early on. And therefore, intrinsically, it is likely that repowering of existing sites is going to be preferable in landscape terms to developing new sites. There will, of course, be some exceptions to that because impacts depend on the scale, as I was saying. But I think if you take that broader perspective, then just saying we need more wind energy, which is indeed true, doesn't necessarily mean that every site will be acceptable. And obviously the process we're going through underlines that point.
Thank you. I think I'd like to ask the applicants to comment on those views that have been expressed there, particularly Mr. Shaw's points. How would you respond to his comments? Mr. Scott?
Shall I start?
Yes, you can if you wish, Mr. Hardy.
Well, just to say, first point is that there's a clear attack on national policy, and whilst those points are heartfelt, they're really ones that need to be taken up with the ministers rather than the applicants in this case, because it's for the ministers to articulate policy, and that they do very clearly. In relation, and it's a related point to what Mr. Armstrong had to say, the Arkany decision, which is at 8.25 and paragraph 16. Yeah, absolutely, but Mr. Armstrong, with respect, misinterprets that. And what it says is that there is a requirement for more wind farm development. So that's the additional point, which it has been stressed before. So the onshore wind policy statement isn't just about status quo; it's about more and going faster. So that's the key part of that statement. And inappropriate locations, yes, absolutely. So what is an appropriate location has to change if there is going to be stronger weight attached to the benefits and the objectives of meeting the climate change agenda. So you're going to have significant effects on the landscape. That's paragraph 3.6.1 of the OWPS. And the point that's just been made is, well, look, all the earlier sites were the easier sites. Yeah, that's precisely the point that the applicants are making. There are tough decisions to make. And it may be that tougher calls have to be made, therefore, an acceptance of change to the landscape. And the way in the planning system that's dealt with is by giving increased weight to the requirements for climate change objectives. So, first of all, there's a basic, the underlying tone is one of a challenge to national policy. That is not a matter that needs to concern you as decision or you reporters or the decision makers. But secondly, that change to the equation is the point that we are making.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Calvert, sorry, no, it's Mr. Shaw has his hand up again. I think, Mr. Shaw, I'll just allow the other applicants to comment and then I'll come back to you if that's okay, if they want to.
I add on to Mr. Hardy?
Yep.
Yeah. So again, just trying to make sure not repetitive, so apologies, but I just made a point in terms of the percentage-driven analysis in terms of what each scheme and Craiginmoddie as an individual scheme would contribute to meeting targets isn't the right starting point from Mr. Shaw, if I may. Policy talks around maximising the potential. It looks at the assessments of that flow from that, but it is about maximising potential. The install capacity is the target. And 20 gigawatt target in particular. We have national development, so we're already into that league in terms of where the scheme is at. And this is a point. Mr. Hardy's picked up on it in terms of a challenge on national policy. But just saying, well, it's only a small percentage isn't correct in the assessment of meeting the climate change emergency and nature crisis. It's about leadership. It's about energy security, and we do need more sites. New sites are the driver within the onshore wind policy statement, and repowering has a part to play in that, but it is the imperative of new sites that's got to come through.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Scott, you had your hand up. Did you want to say something?
Thanks, ma'am. Just picking up on the point in terms of effectiveness and efficiency of the scheme. So in addition to the 79 megawatts of installed capacity at Carrick, just wanted to highlight that there is a 20 megawatt battery storage facility as well, which in terms of what that can achieve, we do have within energy, onshore wind policy statement, para 8.45, so that's CD 516. It does speak to the fact that battery storage not only reduces the pressure from the grid, which we touched on in terms of potential constraints earlier on, but it also provides a locally focused energy provision and reduced cost to consumers. So I just wanted to highlight in the planning balance the ability of the battery storage element of the Carrick scheme has in terms of increases in effectiveness and sustainability delivery of renewable energy.
Thank you. Mr. Bell, did you want to say anything before we go on to others?
Just briefly, I think Mr. Shaw's point was really questioning the role of wind energy. I would just direct you to two paragraphs in the onshore wind statement, page 3, which is the Minister's statement in the foreword, the second last paragraph. Deployment of onshore wind will be key to ensuring our 2030 targets are met. And then secondly, on page 49, in the conclusion, first line, deployment of onshore wind is mission critical for meeting our climate targets. And these targets, of course, have a statutory basis. So wind is not just a nice to have or an option. It is the key technology, the government is saying, at the moment for the statutory targets. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Armstrong, you've got your hand up.
Yes, ma'am. Just to come back on 2 points from Mr. Hardy, just to correct him on the on his statement relevancy. Ma'am, it's up to you and your colleagues to decide what is or is not relevant in the first instance, and ultimately for the Scottish Minister to decide that. And also the weight to be given to policy is ultimately a matter for the decision makers. One can obviously expect that the Scottish ministers are likely to give considerable weight to their own policy, but that goes on to issues of then interpretation and application of that policy. So with respect to Mr. Hardy's rather sweeping comment there, I submit that he is simply incorrect. In relation to the issue of my misinterpretation of the sentence on page 16, well, my recollection was that I read out the sentence and I read out the bit about ongoing need for more onshore wind development and capacity in locations across Scotland. The sentence does also state where it can be accommodated in appropriate locations. We'll no doubt go on to discuss page 16 in greater detail the conclusions of the Scottish Ministers in relation to the MPF in due course.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Shaw, I'm conscious you did have your hand up, but you've taken it down now. Is there anything else you want to say just before we move on to the next item on the agenda?
Yeah, I understood you'd registered it, Mum, so I clicked it off. There are so many statements in all of these documents, and I do take issue, as has been pointed out, with the policy. I take issue with Scottish Government policy in a lot of areas, but one of the statements that was made in, I think it was in this document, was that wind is a cheap and reliable source of renewable energy. And when you get statements like that, which are so clearly wrong, you do wonder about how much reliance you should put on some of the other statements. However, both this document and the one we're going to discuss next both refer to the trying to put an end to discrimination. And what we have here with these kind of developments is discrimination against rural communities, pure and simple. A lot of these developments are keyholed into the forest. Now, the average height of a forest tree is what, 15 meters? The average house in a housing estate is perhaps roughly the same size. So why not keyhole these wind turbines into housing estates? Because that complies very much with the idea of 20-minute communities and production close to consumption. I suspect the answer is that you wouldn't get away with it. So why do you get away with it in the country? However, one fundamental point, and it's come up again, and it comes up time after time after time. What in heaven's name is 20 megawatts of battery storage? That's like saying a bottle contains 2 square feet of water. It is simply not a unit of capacity. Do we mean megawatt hours, megawatt minutes, or what? What are we actually talking about? Because I suspect that, as in all of the other applications we've seen recently, this is merely the battery storage that's required to balance up the output from the turbines to then feed it into the grid. So could we have clarity on that, please?
Mr. Scott, would you be able to just answer that for Mr. Shaw's benefit?
Yeah, just to clarify, I believe it's 20 megawatt hours of physical battery storage.
Okay, thank you. That's helpful. Right, I think we'll try and move on to the last two items under item 3 before we then have maybe a short break before we start talking about the national planning frameworks. We have a couple of issues here just to clarify. Item 3D about noise. So obviously we've had the noise hearing now. After that noise hearing, we are clear on what the current national policy guidance is on noise and the recommended framework for assessing noise. However, if we look at para 3.7.3 of the OWPS, it refers to a short-term review project. So we want to be sure that no further guidance has now emerged in that respect. And if new guidance does emerge at the UK level before ministers determine these applications, that the OWPS is directing that we should use that new guidance. So I would look for the applicants and the council to comment on that, please. Mr. MacLeod.
Thank you, ma'am. We obviously did cover this in a fair bit of detail at the noise session. I think the position is exactly as you put it. There is no further guidance at this point in time. The extent to which you would have to take into account new guidance will really depend on what that new guidance looks like, whether it's at consultation stage and so on. And I think the best we can say at this stage is if something does come out, then it would be relevant for you to consider how to deal with it. and you would probably want to ask submissions from all parties at that point as to weight and relevance and so on.
Okay, that's helpful. Does anyone have a different view to that? Anybody want to make comments? Council want to say anything? Mr.
Yep.
Somebody's saying yes, but I'm not sure who it is.
Ma'am.
Yes, sorry, Mr. Callan, could you comment?
Yeah, very quickly is that something that's subject of discussion on tomorrow's hearing session. One of the things we should be working towards in terms of the petition is count of any not dated guidance to ensure that if there is changes, and by the time the development starts, construction or install capacity, that takes time for any legislation.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Shaw, you've got your hand up. Did you want to come in on this point?
Yes, Mum. I'll try again to be very brief. I bought a new lawnmower this year. If I was living in suburbia and I was to take that lawnmower to cut my grass at 5 o'clock in the morning on a Sunday, it wouldn't be very long before the police turned up because I'd be causing a public nuisance. Why then is it acceptable to inflict that level of noise on rural communities when they're not used to having a level of noise anything like what you normally experience in suburbia? That's all.
Okay, I mean, Mr. Shaw, we are talking more about the policy framework for noise rather than the actual effects. So I take it you don't have any comments on that.
No, just purely the logical ones that it doesn't make a lot of sense.
Okay, thank you. We will move on to item E then, which relates to the tourism references in section 5.6 of OWPS. In para 5.6.5, there is specific reference to onshore wind not generally having negative effects on tourism. And we will obviously touch on the policy position on tourism impacts again under MPF 4 below, but do you have any comments about how we should interpret this section of OWPS? I wonder if the applicants could comment. Mr. Bell, you look like you're ready to say something.
Yes, thank you. I think reading this section of the...
Oh, I'm sorry, we've lost you again. Frozen.
Yes, it's wind farms and tourism. That's the sentiment to me that comes through. And I think that's a reflection of the research findings over the last...
Mr. Bell, I'm
identified any
again. I'm sorry, Mr.
negative.
Mr. Bell, I'm sorry, I'm not hearing you properly. I wonder if we'll come to somebody else first and then we'll come back to you because it seems to be freezing. And then I'm not hearing the audio. I don't know if that's the same for everybody else.
Do if you can hear me. Sorry, can you hear me?
I can hear you now, yeah.
I'm in a rural location in our...
Sorry, I've lost you again.
We're in this hotel. I have another option to go somewhere in 45. It's about a 45-minute drive to better connection.
Okay.
So I think I'll do that at lunchtime.
It's certainly it's kind of going at the moment more than it's coming. So I'll go to one of the other applicants. We'll go around the other party. We'll come back to you and see if it's better in 5 minutes, and then we can make a decision about whether you need to move location. Could I ask perhaps Mr. Calvert?
Yeah, I think I caught what Mr. Bell was saying in the intermittent signal, ma'am. So I think we're probably aligned in respect of this. Is that Section 5.6 of the onshore wind policy statement sets out a very clear narrative in terms of the government's position on tourism impacts, and it is the paragraph 5.65 that is the go-to in respect of that. I know in agenda item 4H we're going to cover about the emission in policy 11, so it's how much we go there now. But arguably, it has been an issue in the past in terms of wind farm developments and impacts on tourism. But onshore wind policy statement 5.6 sets out a very, very clear position in terms of the government's understanding of the matter, and actually that there are positive effects that can arise from wind farm. There are wider studies, including the applicant's own within the additional matters that have come through to yourselves and your fellow reporters in terms of the socioeconomics and the impacts on tourism. But in a nutshell, wind farms are not shown to have a detrimental negative effect on tourism. Quite the opposite in many cases, and there's no reason to depart from that view in respect of Craiginmoddie.
Okay, I see Mr. Callan had his hand up next, and then I'll come to you, Mr. Scott.
Let's just understand, ma'am. Paragraph 5.65, that is starting point in terms of tourism references. I would like to draw attention to CD 009.045, which is Nature Scotland, Environment Scotland's guidance on designating local landscape areas. On page 9 of that document, there's a table which refers to the top 5 visitor motivations and for covering both first time and repeat visitors, the landscape and views or scenery landscape under the 5 of all categories. And I think it's just important to stress what is on rather than actual physical location.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Scott?
Thanks, ma'am. Yes, I wouldn't disagree with Mr. Callan in that respect of being a starting point, but just to emphasise from para 565 that it does say that it's a general, this is not a general rule in terms of the effects on tourism. There'd be discrete impacts in some cases. So I think it's then appropriate on a site-by-site or proposed development basis to consider those impacts with environmental impact assessment reports, which in respect of Carrick, that's been undertaken in chapter 12. So just wanted to make that point, ma'am.
That's helpful. Does anybody else comment, Mr. Shaw or Mr. Thompson? No. Mr. Callan, you've still got your hand up. I don't know if you want to say anything else. No. Okay. Mr. Shaw, would you like to say anything?
I did comment that some of the statements within this policy are complete rubbish, and frankly, this is one of them.
Okay. Anybody else? No. Okay, so I think we'll just have a very short break before we start talking about National Planning Framework. We've been going for an hour now, so if we could just have a 10-minute break and come back at about 10 past 10, and we will see you then if that suits everybody. Thank you. Hello, is everybody returned? Thank you. I might just start by going to Mr. Fraser and Mr. Bell, just wanting to check Mr. Bell's connection. Is he with us?
Yes, I'm here. I think I'll keep the camera off to see if that helps. Does that sound okay?
It sounds okay for now. Yeah. Mr. Fraser, are you okay with that?
I'm happy with that, ma'am. Unfortunately, Mr. Bell, because he's at a different inquiry tomorrow, has had to travel away from his base, and obviously the internet connection isn't great. I've suggested he tries to do it without his camera to see if that improves things, and I think his intention is to try to travel somewhere else during lunch break to try to get a better connection. But if you're happy with him to sort of hide his face at the moment, with this.
Yeah, that's helpful. We'd obviously want him to be involved if he can be. So it sounds like it's okay at the moment, and we'll just play it by you. Okay, so we will turn now to item 4, which is National Planning Framework. So can we agree first that no element of Scottish planning policy is now relevant to our assessment? Is everybody content with that? Yes. And before getting into the detail of NPF 4, I just wanted the council to clarify the contents of table 4.1 in their hearing statement. So that's CD 1523, and that discusses the topics relating to each wind farm. So have you got that in front of you, the council? That's table 4.1. And in that table, a few boxes are not ticked, including the box for residential visual amenity for Craiginmoddie, and the transport boxes for Carrick and Knockcronal. And there's also others on peat and private water supply. So I just wanted to check, does the council mean there that these are not relevant issues for the proposals, or specifically that these were not matters that the council objected on?
No, simply they're not matters that we've objected on.
Right, okay. That's helpful. And in your hearing statement, if we stick with that, paragraph 3.3.3, it states that the development plan, including NPF 4, is the primary basis for determination of such applications. Is that the case? Do any of the parties have any comment on that? Nope. So if we look at which NPF policies are most relevant to the proposals, from the submissions we see that there's general agreement that policy 11 is the most relevant. However, the council is also suggesting that policy 14, which is the policy on design, is relevant. On this, Craiginmoddie and Carrick disagree, and Knockcronal considers it has very limited relevance and is more properly addressed through policy 11. So to what extent does the council consider now that design aspects are covered under policies 4 and 11? And do you still consider that policy 14 is directly relevant? Could I ask Mr. Armstrong or Mr. Callan first?
Yeah.
Actually, at the same time, sorry, before you go on to that, I did also want to ask about policy 11, because policy 29, sorry, the council also lists policy 29, which is the one on rural development, as being relevant. So I'd like to just get other parties' views on that. But if the council could start, first of all, by talking about policy 14, whether you think that's still relevant.
You still believe that it is relevant to the assessment of these proposals, while landscape and visual matters are addressed under NPF policy 4 and 11. The overall aim of policy 14 is promoting a well-designed development, and the aspects of policy 14 which refer to not be poorly designed or detrimental to the amenity area. And these are relevant to the design and layout of development sites, all development sites, but that doesn't preclude wind farm developments as well.
Okay, thank you. So I wonder if the applicants could comment on that about policy 14, and also any other comments on policy 29, if you think it's relevant. Which of the applicants would like? Mr. Bell is going to try. Let's see if we can hear you.
Thank you. Yes, I think policy 14, it's important to note that it refers to the qualities of successful places, and these are contained in Annex D of NPF 4. And when we look at these, we can see that the first one is about supporting the prioritisation of women's safety and improving physical and mental health. The second one is supporting attractive natural and built spaces. The third one is about connecting networks, making it easy to move around. The fourth one is about architectural styles. The fifth one is about living, playing, working and staying in an area and resilience of an area in terms of the climate. And the sixth one is about supporting investment in the long-term value of buildings and streets. So I would maintain that this has got very limited, if any, relevance to Policy 11. And insofar as residential amenity is a matter, Mr. Callan's right, it is, but NPF 4 specifically refers to residential amenity and matters of design. So I see no reason to go to this policy. Thank you.
And just while you're on, policy 29, do you have anything to say about that? And by the way, I can hear you very clearly, so that's good.
Okay, good. 29, again, when you look at the detailed provisions of the policy about farming, crofts, production and processing facilities, redundant buildings, brownfield land, small-scale development, what aspect is relevant? There is a reference to essential infrastructure. So for overhead line transmission infrastructure, that may be relevant, potentially for wind farm development. But I think there's nothing in that policy that isn't already captured by Policy 11, I would say.
Okay, thank you. Maybe the other applicants, Mr. Scott.
Thanks, ma'am. Yeah, firstly, in respect of Policy 14, you are correct, Carrick's position that it's not a relevant consideration for the purposes of the determination. Our reasons are that it can't be readily applied to wind farm developments and it shouldn't be conflated with other development plan policies that are more appropriate. So in that respect, NPF 4 Policy 11, which obviously directly concerns energy developments, it's got design and site-specific design matters, so any relevant considerations that would have fallen under Policy 14 for more general developments that are applicable are already caught within Policy 11 for the purposes of assessment.
Albert? Anything to add?
Very succinctly, Policy 11 is our go-to policy for the reasons as stated by Mr. Bell and Mr. Scott.
Okay, thank you. Anyone else want to comment? Okay, so if we move on to item A, so policy 1, and we've talked a little bit of the balancing in relation to OWPS, but if we turn to look at this policy, how should we balance these elements of policy 1? The council suggests in 4.2.2 of your hearing statement that NPF is clear that the natural environment is on an equal footing with the drive for net zero. Are there any comments on what the council says? Mr. Bell? Mr. Bell, I think you're on mute possibly, so hopefully it's not a technical problem.
Yes, sorry.
Great.
Yes, I think this is an important point that may go to the fundamentals actually of the council's case. And where the council states at paragraph 3.2.2 that the OWPS highlights the critical importance of Scotland's natural environment, it doesn't actually say that. The only reference to critical in the onshore wind statement is to do with the mission critical position of targets relative to onshore wind. Now, there are two other paragraphs, I think, that link to what the council was saying. The first one is that at paragraph 4.2.2, the council states NPF 4 is clear that the natural environment is on an equal footing with the drive for net zero. Now, question to the council would be, what does it mean by the natural environment? Because I think there would be no disagreement that the nature crisis has got an equal footing with the climate crisis, and we can see that in Policy 1 that we're dealing with. But it's later when the council at paragraph 4.5.10 of its hearing statement, in the context of impact on local landscape areas, states that the adverse effects, take it that's on the landscape areas, must also be considered in the context of the nature crisis and the need to preserve the environmental resources in the region in accordance with NPF and LDP2. Now, if you were talking about biodiversity resources, I think there would probably be not much disagreement. But what I've taken from the council's position is that they are saying that there's a need to preserve local landscape areas as environmental resources on an equal footing with the climate crisis. Now, I would say that is a wrong interpretation of what NPF4 is saying. Biodiversity in the nature crisis is one thing, but it would be wrong, I would suggest, to elevate the protection of local landscape areas alongside the protection of biodiversity and the enhancement of biodiversity. Now, I may be wrong in that that is not what the council means, but that's what I've taken it to be. And as I say, if the council is advancing that line, then I think that would be a wrong position, and it's not something that I think NPF4 is saying. Thank you.
Thank you. I think it'd be helpful perhaps to hear from the council first before we go around the other applicants, just to respond to some of those points. Mr. Armstrong?
Ma'am, it'll be Mr. Callum that will address this point. I think Mr. Bell is going on to really issues in relation to policy 3, which we'll obviously come on to in due course, and dealing with the interconnection between policy 3, policy 4, and policy 11 and policy 1, which we'll address with that. If Mr. Callum comes back on the sort of general points that have been made in response just now, and we'll come on to the linkage when it comes to policy 3.
Thank you. Yeah. I think it is the general points, but also the specific question that Mr. Bell asked about what you meant in that statement in 4.2.2 in terms of what you meant by the natural environment.
We actually meant the nature crisis rather than the natural environment. Okay, wrong phrase to use.
Okay. That's a simple answer. Thank you. Are there any other comments from the other applicants on this item? I don't.
Just apologies. Yeah, just in terms of the codependence of combating climate change and nature crises, there are interlinks between the two. They are a function of each other. So that point shouldn't be missed in making this decision. But yeah, they are over an equal weight in terms of what policy 1 is saying.
Okay, Mr. Fraser.
I'm grateful for Mr. Callan's clarification. Really, 4.2.2 is referring to the nature crisis rather than the natural environment. But I don't think he's quite answered Mr. Bell's point, which is that the nature crisis does not encompass, so to speak, elevating local landscape areas in their importance. The nature crisis is talking about something else. And I don't think actually Mr. Callan really addressed that particular point.
I was going to come to Mr. MacLeod first, and then we'll come back to the council. Mr. MacLeod, you've got your hand.
Thank you, ma'am. Yes, I was a bit confused by Mr. Callan's answer, because when one looks at his hearing statement and paragraph 4.3.9 in particular, what he says there is balancing the severe effects on landscape sectors and by extension the nature crisis against the benefits provided in terms of addressing the climate crisis. It's considered the adverse impacts of the development are of sufficient severity to outweigh the contribution to the developments will make to addressing climate change. And he then goes on to say landscape and visual impacts are discussed further in relation to policy 4 and 11 and within the inquiry reports by Carol Anderson. Now, I think what Mr. Callan was saying in answer to Mr. Bell's point is that the council does not equate landscape and visual impacts with an impact on the nature crisis. I just want to be absolutely clear of that point, because it does seem that that is the basis on which his hearing statement was produced.
Mr. Callan?
Yeah, thank you, ma'am. That is actually what we are saying. That's the point we are trying to get across. There's cross-cutting nature of impact on landscape and biodiversity, and this all feeds into the nature crisis. So that is exactly the argument that we were trying to put across.
Okay. Do the applicants want to say anything else in response?
Right. Well, if I may, I mean, they're completely different receptors with respect. That is not the, it's not what policy says. It's a basic misunderstanding.
Mr. McLeod, you had your hand up as well.
Yes, I mean, I'd just echo what Mr. Hardy said, and it will be a matter of submission in due course, but just for your reference at this stage, a case that Mr. Armstrong's only too familiar with, Tesco against Dundee City Council. The council cannot make policy say what it wishes it meant. Policy says what it says, and as Mr. Hardy says, there is nothing in the nature crisis policy that deals with landscape at all. They are different receptors.
Any other?
But just one
Mr. Hardy?
point again, if I may, and it's a case that Mr. Armstrong's already referred to, but it's a very helpful decision, it seems to me, because it's up to date, and it's the Arkney extension decision. And all I would reference are pages 16 and 17 of that decision.
That's CE 825, is it?
8025A. And I'm not going to read all of it, but those paragraphs on page 17 are very helpful in teasing out the considerations, and you'll see in the paragraph there that guided by policy principles, including the nature crisis. So it's the separation of landscape impacts and effects, nature crisis, and indeed the point that was being made by myself earlier on in the last paragraph of that subsection, where the decisions on landscape impacts, there were some impacts on WLAs, landscape and visual impacts, which are considered acceptable in the context of the benefits that the proposed event will bring in terms of net economic benefits, contributing to renewable energy and climate change targets. So I think it's very helpful, ready reckoner of where we are and what ministers think about the interplay between nature crisis, landscape effects, and renewable energy benefits.
Thank you. Mr. Shaw, you have your hand up.
Yes, ma'am. As always, I'm amazed and very impressed how, if you put together enough eminently qualified lawyers and ask them to analyse a particular paragraph, they can come up with completely different views depending on what they want it to say. But it seems to me that this magical phrase, biodiversity improvement, it is being used to such a point that it no longer really has any meaning. I mean, what we're doing by constructing these wind farms is we're creating a whole lot of new roads, we're fencing off significant elements of land, and various other activities, all of which impact upon nature and the nature crisis. Now, there's been harvesting going on in the forest about 1 kilometre from where we are. The deer that were occupying that area have all moved to our side of the forest. Now, and many of the other animals and birds have moved because where they were living has been effectively destroyed. But there needs to be an understanding of this. I've sat and been lectured on biodiversity improvement by people who can't tell a daisy from a dandelion. And quite frankly, we need to be much clearer about what's going on here.
Mr. Shaw, sorry to interrupt. We will be going on to talk about biodiversity enhancement under the next item, and I will be asking the applicants to say a bit more about that. But this was specifically about policy 1 and the sort of balancing of those factors. So was there anything else specific you wanted to ask or say there?
Okay, simply that it is quite clear to the lay reader of the National Planning Framework 4 that climate and nature crises are set on an equal footing. I'll leave it at that.
Okay, thank you. That's very helpful. And Mr. Thompson, I apologise, you actually had a number 1 against your name, so I should have come to you before I came to Mr. Shaw, but you've been very patient, so if you'd like to raise a point now.
That's fine. This is obviously relevant to the next 2 items as well, but I do think it's relevant to policy 1 because I think those from the developer's standpoint are overdoing the distinction between biodiversity and landscape. If you come on to policy 4, the natural places one, it talks about restoring and enhancing natural assets. And it then includes in policy 4 policies that relate to landscape areas under policy 4D. So it is actually acknowledging that landscape is part of natural assets. And my argument would be nature and natural assets are very much the same thing. So I think you can exaggerate the extent to which it's possible to differentiate between landscape and biodiversity. And indeed, as one who used to work for Scottish Natural Heritage, I would point out the definition of natural heritage in the Act actually encompasses both.
Thank you for that. Any of the applicants? Mr. MacLeod, I see you're putting your hand.
Very brief point, ma'am, and we'll come back to it, no doubt, in due course. But just to note that Mr. Thompson was referring to the natural places policy, and he made the point that the applicants were overdoing the difference between biodiversity and landscape. The reason that the distinction is made is that there is a completely separate policy for biodiversity, and that's policy 3. And as I say, we'll no doubt come back to discuss that in due course.
That's a yes to that from Craiginmoddie.
Okay. Any other comments on this item? No. Okay, so that does take us on to policy 3. So we will get into biodiversity enhancement now. So looking at, again, at the council's hearing statement, paragraph 4.4.4 of the hearing statement, it says there that the biodiversity enhancements are not entirely clear in all cases. So I think it would be helpful for us and perhaps for Mr. Shaw to ask the applicants to clarify their position in relation to biodiversity enhancement for each proposal. So if I could turn to whoever is ready to speak on that, who's looking like they are. Mr. Scott?
Yeah, so the applicant's position, there's a summary of benefits which is listed within our hearing statement. That's CD 15-021 from page 20 onwards, chapter 6, sorry, the summary of benefits. So we do accept that the policy applies. It supports the approach the Carrick applicant has taken in respect of biodiversity matters, which is covered within our EIA Chapter 7, Ecology and Biodiversity, that's CD 009, and the revision of the assessment following the deletion of turbine 10 in the addendum, that's 2162. So we do think that, taken on from the discussion we've just had about NPF4 policy 1, clearly this policy, as my colleague Mr. MacLeod advised, is specifically to biodiversity matters. What the applicant has done is prepared within part of the assessment an outline habitat management plan, amongst other assessments. So the habitat management plan is CD 2132, and that plan, it basically has aims for biodiversity improvements and picking up on the policy wording with NPF policy 3, seeking to realise benefits. We're looking to restore the condition and improve the quality of peatland habitat within the Carrick application site, which extends to 28 hectares, which would be a net gain of 18.6 hectares. And in terms of what that actually mean within the Carrick development, the ongoing monitoring and management of that plan as committed to within the condition, which we know will be discussed tomorrow, would see wider benefits proliferate from that initial investment of the restoration of that part of the site. So we do take that policy 3 does require an enhancement, and that's something that we've embedded within the design for the Carrick development.
Okay, Mr. Calvert or Mr. Bell?
Thank you, ma'am. Yeah, the main aspects obviously covered with. Hi, can you hear me okay? Excellent. The main
I
aspects
can.
for the excellent, thank you. The main aspects really for the Craiginmoddie scheme are captured within the EIA, but also more fundamentally within the outline habitat management plan that was submitted as a further submission. I've not got the core document reference just to hand immediately, but just to summarise the HMP measures which the applicant commits to a further update in due course. Is that there is a 5 years of commissioning Craiginmoddie to restore and enhance a minimum of 5.5 hectares of wet, modified and blanket bog habitat within the site. This will offset the area of blanket bog permanently lost or degraded as a result of the wind farm, which is only 0.06 hectares, so a significant increase in new area. The restoration and enhancement of a significantly larger area than expected loss is intended to offset both the permanent and temporary loss or degradation. This will increase the quality and extent of Annex 1 habitats on the site. There is also intention to create and enhance habitats within the keyhold areas of the proposed development. With each keyhold area, there will be approximately 3.4. Each keyhold area will approximately be 3.14 hectares and offers opportunities to further increase the area of habitat restored, such as the creation of wetland habitat by raising the water table or planting fruit and nut-bearing shrub and scrub species. So that will be all well and good for the enhancement of those species that will forage on those matters. Implement an additional enhancement and or monitoring for waders, deer, badger, pine, marten, bats and fish to achieve an overall biodiversity net gain within the site. And other aspects within the keyhold areas to include, as I mentioned, scrub to be allowed to be managed at a particular height and encroached within the turbine bases and to maintain those wet conditions. Again, that foraging and nesting habitat while allowing for habitat connectivity. Overall, a significant package of matters that Craiginmoddie are proposing, which would offset and enhance the habitat as a result, and that opportunity to do so should be taken, balancing out the significant weight to combating the nature crisis.
Thank you, Mr. Colbert. And perhaps Mr. Bell could just clarify for Knockcronal, and then we'll allow the council and others to comment.
Thank you. There's really 3 points I would say. One is probably there's a prematurity matter around this policy, in that we know from the Chief Planner's letter of 8th of February that guidance on an accepted methodology for calculating and measuring biodiversity net gain is still to be issued. So that can only be in an embryonic stage at the moment, and nothing has been issued. And I think it's informative to see at the last paragraph of the Chief Planner's note, where he says there will be some proposals that won't give rise to opportunities to contribute to enhancement, and it's going to be for the decision maker to take into account the policies in NPF4 as a whole. So I think the Chief Planner is being realistic in the face of the absence of any accepted guidance at the moment. So I think that's a starting point that should be recognised as the context. And then second point I would make is that in terms of specific measures, notwithstanding that prematurity, the Knockcronal applicant has proposed enhancement measures. These are set out in the Outline Habitat Management Plan, which is Appendix 8.6, CD 003.176. I won't go into the detail of those, but broadly it relates to riparian planting. But there is also a commitment to enhancement of bogland, and that both of these matters can be referenced within a planning condition to secure them. And then the third point is that I think it needs to be recognised that the biggest way in which the biodiversity nature crisis will be tackled is going to be through dealing with climate change. So there is a difference. If this was an application, say, for an out-of-town retail park with a lot of car parking, it may be that the contribution to dealing with climate change is very limited. But because it is a wind farm, and given what the government has said in the onshore wind statement, that it's critical, this technology, to dealing with targets, then that is also a point that I think needs to be borne in mind when looking at the biodiversity matter and the issue. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Fraser, would you like to add something?
Yes, ma'am. It's just one further document. In addition to core document 3176, which Mr. Bell referred us to, there is also further written submissions with respect to the additional restoration modified bog, which you'll find in core document 16.067, if that's what it's called. And I think it's also a matter that's addressed in the conditions which we'll obviously discuss tomorrow.
Okay, that's helpful. Would the council like to respond in terms of, I think it was your point that it wasn't entirely clear. Is there something further that you would like to ask now that you've made that exercise?
Yes, ma'am. Perhaps if I could, yes, ma'am, if I could perhaps start and then sort of open up the discussion here. The applicants have set out today and in some of their evidence the specific benefits they've the proposals are offering. But the difficulty is, as Mr. Bell focused on in his prematurity point, that obviously policy 3 requires this type of development proposals for.
Sorry, Mr. Armstrong, you're kind of.
Sorry.
Oh, just hold a second. I think we had a little break in the transmission there. Can everybody hear me okay? Yep, I think it's saying that the sound quality is bad. You did break up a little bit. If you could just pick up your point again, Mr. Armstrong.
Right. It was really coming back to the important point, as Mr. Bell recognised in his prematurity point, is going back to policy 3, that for these types of development, national developments, there is a requirement under policy 3 that they will only be supported. I emphasise only be supported where it can be demonstrated that the proposals will conserve, restore and enhance biodiversity. So there has got to be an enhancement of biodiversity. Now, the difficulty is that so far the Scottish Government haven't set out any guidance in relation to the metrics for calculating the benefits against the disbenefits of a proposal. But the applicants have not attempted to do that here. And there is a clear requirement of policy that they will only be supported if that can be shown. And it's specific to this type of development, national development. And that is the difficulty that all parties obviously face here, that they have got to set out how to, or how they consider they've assessed the gains against the losses and come to a positive gain at the end of the day. Otherwise, a proposal is contrary to policy 3, it's national development. On the second point, just so as I could then pass over to Mr. Callum, in relation to the connection between policy 3 and policy 4, what one can see from the key policy connections on page 4, I think it's electronic page 40, paper page 39, in relation to policy 3, that the key policy connections are in relation to the tackling the climate and nature crisis. It's obviously policy 1, natural places, and for our purposes, policy 4, and energy, and policy 11. And there is a very helpful, as this.
Sorry, Mr. Armstrong, I just missed the last thing. I got that you said policy 1 and policy 4, and then it went blank. So if you could
and policy
from there.
And policy 11, energy.
Still causing problems. Hang on.
Can you hear me?
Right, I think I can hear you now. So let's pick up from policy 4 if you can.
Policy 4 and policy 11, and that's set out on the key connections. And there is a very helpful cross-cutting outcomes and policy links in the MPF on page 9, electronic page 10, which helpfully ties all of this in together with policy 1, policy 4, and policy 3. And that's set out on page 9, as I say, electronic page 10, where it draws in the links between policy 1, policy 4, and policy 3, and the requirements of policy 3. So with that introduction, I'll then pass over to Mr.
Okay, thank you. Stefan?
Probably don't have too much to say after John has covered a lot of that. So what I was going to say, but the one thing to point out in terms of the council's position, it would be without having a metric within policy 3 to assess the level of enhancement from each of these proposals. I think it's a difficult for the decision maker and the council, and while each applicant has a management plan and refers to various different elements of enhancement that they're going to do, there is no target or no
I've lost you now. Don't know what's happening down in South Ayrshire. If that's where you are, maybe you're not there. Right, carry on now.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, I can.
Yeah. It was just simply to say that the habitat management plan for each proposal, whilst they refer to various levels of mitigation and restoration of habitat, without a metric in NTF 4 policy 3, it's not entirely clear on what is the level of enhancement that is proposed by each government.
Okay, so I think I understand the point you're making about the metric, but on the specific point that you make in your hearing statement that the enhancements are not entirely clear, do you have more comfort now in terms of what the proposed enhancements are, or do you still have a concern in that respect?
Sorry, ma'am. It is in that context, whilst that refers to mitigation and enhancement and restoration, it's in the context of without a metric to assess that against. I think it's for the council and possibly the decision maker to make the assessment and finding that balance that's required.
So you're not saying that you don't necessarily have enough information. It's how to assess what you have.
Yeah, there is obviously a certain level of information. Whether that's enough, without the metric to assess it against, then go to
Okay, I mean, something that we'll have a look at in a bit more detail, and if we do feel that we need more information, we'll obviously ask for that.
Ma'am.
Yes.
No, I think the concern is the sort of one-sided extent of the information that we have in balancing it up, as Mr. Callum has just set out. We have got the applicants have set out the various gains that they're providing, but it's balancing that against the impacts and calculating whether overall there is a gain or not. And that has not been, and we understand the difficulty for all the applicants in relation to this point, but that is not before you whether there is a net gain at the end of the day when you balance the negatives. And until that's done, it's very difficult for any party to say that that these proposals are compliant with policy 3. And because policy 3, it is critical in that it's specifically directly related to this type of development.
Thank you. Mr. Shaw, you have your hand up. In fact, somebody else must have. Oh no, it's Mr. Armstrong was number 1. Mr. Shaw, you're number 2. Do you have a comment?
Simply to say, Mum, that accepting what Mr. Armstrong has said and very much in agreement with it, Save Straighten's position on this matter is that there's actually nothing wrong with what's there at the moment. In fact,
sorry, I missed what you were just about to say, Mr. Shaw. Everybody seemed.
Okay, I'll try again. Save Straighten's position.
Mr. Shaw, we just lost you for a second. Let's just check that everybody is back and can hear me. Yes, I think.
With respect, Ma'am,
Right,
I
Mr. Scott, you
haven't
make your
had.
point again.
With respect, Ma'am, I haven't had any interruptions with any of the previous situations. So I wonder if, in fact, it's not the South
Oh, that's
Ayrshire
great. You
coverage,
must have a good Wi-Fi connect.
and a very expensive one as well. Safe Straighten's, I'm losing the thread now. Safe Straighten's position is that there's nothing wrong with these places as they are. Indeed, as was pointed out at the evening reading, parts of the area covered by these applications are actually designated as intimate pastoral valleys by SNH or whatever it's called. So our position is that, quite simply, there is no question of demonstrating that these will be in a materially better state after intervention. They clearly won't. They won't even. These developments won't even maintain the status quo. Never mind improve things. That's all. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Bell?
Yes, just a couple of points to finish. My understanding is the council was not objecting to the Knockcronal proposal on the matter of biodiversity and non-compliance with policy in relation to biodiversity or nature conservation impact. That would be the starting point. Secondly, in terms of the impacts of the development, Mr. Armstrong said that they're not understood, if I took it correctly. The EIA sets out that there would be no significant impacts in relation to nature conservation matters. And that has been progressed on the way of accepted methodology with which the council took no issue. And appropriate mitigation is put forward. Separate from mitigation, enhancement is proposed. And that is very precise in terms of the areas to be on which enhancement would be applied. So for the council to say that there's a lack of understanding of and certainly of precision, that is not correct, and it can be further examined tomorrow in the condition session. And I think the last point would be just to reiterate: the chief planner is well aware that it's tricky for decision makers without the guidance, and that's why I referred to that clear guidance from the chief reporter that we have in the letter. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Thompson, you have your hand up first. Could I come to you, please?
Thank you. If you'll forgive me, I'll revert to the point that I made previously, and really in support of what Mr. Armstrong has said. Yes, policy 3 is about biodiversity, but if you then look at policy 4 actually covers most of the traditional mechanisms for conserving and better managing nature in the form of nature conservation designations. So really trying to draw too sharp a distinction between the two does seem to me unjustified. And in many ways, policy 3 is an opportunity to introduce a new approach in terms of biodiversity gain, which wasn't there before. Whereas the traditional mechanisms for protecting biodiversity are actually brigaded under policy 4. So the two can't really very sensibly be separated.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Calvert, you're up next.
Thank you. I was just going to make a similar point to Mr. Bell. Going back to table 4.1 of the council's hearing statement and the table summary of matters for objection, ecology is not in there. If I can also take you to the panel report from the 3rd of February 2022 with CD 001.120, pages 25 to 26, give a very clear explanation as to the council's understanding and lack of objection in light of consultation responses, which include Nature Scott and the council's own Sustainable Development Biodiversity officers. So there was an understanding of effects, an understanding of mitigations and enhancements. So it could not be any clearer in my view, and very little else to say beyond that. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Mr. MacLeod.
Thank you, ma'am. Just to echo the points that have been made in relation to the assessment of environmental impacts, and again, we will put this in submissions in due course as to the biodiversity impacts properly understood. I just wanted to pick up on one final point about Mr. Armstrong's reference to the cross-cutting outcomes on page 9 of NPF 4. And he's quite right. It does refer to policy 4. Cross-cutting outcomes and policy links are about improving biodiversity. My submission, the bits of policy 4 that are relevant to that can be found in 4B in particular. In some aspects of 4C. But what they're talking about there are European sites, special areas of conservation or special protection areas. And they are talking about it again in a biodiversity or ecological context. They're not talking about them in a landscape context. And if there is any doubt at all about that, you can simply go to the definition of biodiversity, which is in Annex 3 on page 145. And it describes biodiversity as the variability in living organisms and the ecological complexes of which they are part. This includes diversity within species, between species, and of ecosystems. So they are about ecology, properly understood, not about landscape.
Okay, thank you. Does anybody else have any other comments to make about policy 3 before we move on to policy 4? No?
Just
Okay.
one for me, just
Yeah,
it's a
sorry.
recurring theme. Arcany extension again. This is dealt with, and in the absence of a metric, the ministers state how you should deal with this, and they record that the applicants in that state, in that case, have done all that they reasonably can to mitigate. So I think it's just worth. I'm not going to go to it particular paragraphs, but have a look at those pages 16 and 17 of Arcany extension.
Okay, thank you. Right, I think we'll move on to policy 4 then. We've obviously touched on it a little bit, and there is a sort of crossover. And obviously the agenda particularly picked up on policy 4D2, but obviously we will want to talk about 4D1 and the matter there that's been raised in the previous landscape and visual impact inquiry session so far, and no doubt will be raised again this week. So we will talk about integrity as well. But first of all, in terms of setting the themes, do the applicants agree with the council's statement in para 4.3.8 of the council's hearing statement? So again, that's 15 CD 1523. That policy 4 provides enhanced protection for local landscape areas compared to SPP and LDP2. Could we go around the applicants first on that? Mr. Bell?
Thank you. I would say it also does not provide enhanced protection for local landscape areas. There is a different policy architecture. The way the policy is drafted generally reflects the long-standing approach to dealing with national areas. However, the provision in the second limb, which is a separate one from the first limb, in policy 4 paragraph D, makes it clear that any significant adverse effect on the integrity of an area, so that could be a local landscape area, a local nature conservation area, are clearly outweighed by social, environmental, or economic benefits of at least local importance. So in this case, and giving the Knockcronal perspective, Mr. Welsh's position was that there would not be an adverse effect on the integrity of the area. That's the local landscape area affected by Knockcronal.
Sorry, Mr. Bell, we've lost you unless you're taking a long.
Sorry, can you hear me?
You were loud and clear in all of that to us, Mrs. Bell. So, Mum, I don't know whether it's your connection, Mum. In fact, you've now frozen, Mum, on my screen.
Yes. Yes.
Thank you.
Right. Everybody seems to be moving again, I think. Can everybody hear me okay?
And now you froze for a little bit.
No, everybody's,
I think
everybody is.
Ma'am, I'm afraid the problem may be at your end, because I think everybody else is hearing everything okay.
Okay, do you want me to continue?
Well, hold on. The
No.
report is now frozen on our screen.
I think we've lost the reporter.
I could perhaps come in here because I'm in a different room to the other reporters. And perhaps we'll just take a 5-minute break to see if we can reignite the Falkirk office and get them back online. So if we take 5 minutes just now, and I'll talk to the office, okay? But please stay on the call.
Thanks.
Yes. Because it looks like most people are frozen for me, and hopefully you may not even be able to hear me. But a short break for 10 minutes, and we'll try and come back at it. Yes,
Ma'am, I think intervene. I think we've got some issues with how we can hear you, and I think Mr. Bray was going to try and start the IT at Falkirk. I think was his or similar, but it might just be. I think we were just going to take a quick 5-minute break to allow that to happen. So I think the issue is with perhaps with.
I can hear you now, but I think if we could short break, we can come